Okay, welcome to another Cornerstone Church podcast. Thank you for tuning in and for downloading. We are carrying on our new series, and we are looking at different animals in the Bible, and we are thinking about what they are and what they can teach us about God and about ourselves, and how the Bible talks about these different animals. And it's been good fun. We've done the ant so far. We've done both a adult version, if you like, and a kids version, so you can get hold of those. And today we're going to be looking at the pig, which I'm very excited about.
The most blessed of all animals.
The most blessed of all animals. The most delicious of all animals.
Absolutely.
And we're going to sort of work through the Bible and see what the Bible tells us about the pig. So this is just, as we always say, this is just one of the resources that we produce. You can go to our website, cornerstonechurchkingston.org, or our YouTube social media channels, and you can find various other things that we've done, past podcast series for you to download and listen to. But here we are. We're on the pig. So kick us off, Ben. What do we need to know?
About
the pig?
As we'll see through this series, God takes animals that He's made in this world, and He uses them as very visceral, visible pictures for us to teach us something or to show us something about either ourselves or about Him. And the pig has a very strong lead role in the Bible, but he's kind of the bad guy.
Yeah,
he's the guy that God has picked to depict sort of dirtiness and sinfulness and wallowing in just filth, basically.
Yeah. It's a shame the pig does get a bit of a hard time, doesn't he? Well, certainly the first part of the Bible, and they are just so good, aren't they?
They are.
If we think about most of our favourite meats,
yeah.
I didn't do it because we were doing this podcast today, but I had a bacon sandwich this morning.
Did you?
And,
I've got a sausage roll for lunch.
Did you? And I mean, it is amazing, isn't it? I think if you could only eat one type of meat for the rest of your life, the pig would be a fairly good candidate, wouldn't it? And yet, in the Old Testament, when we look at the Old Testament, as you say, the pig, although there is nothing essentially wrong with it, in the sense that God created it as He did with all the other animals, He made it as it was for a purpose. And like all of creation, it reflects something of His own glory and His handiwork. It becomes a symbol, as you say, of uncleanness and something that God's people were to avoid. So you can see, in the law, you've got the verses. So Deuteronomy 14. Says the pig, because it divides the hoof but does not chew the cud, it is unclean for you. You shall not eat any of their flesh nor touch their carcasses. So although it had this divided hoof, which was quite important in the old dietary laws, it didn't chew the cud. It was a mud dweller, a scrap eater, and therefore it's become unclean, hasn't it? So they weren't to eat it.
That's right.
Reason.
Yeah, and it's as you said, it's not anything sort of inherent within the pig necessarily, although it does have a few characteristics that it likes to sort of do, which help with the illustration actually.
Yeah.
So pigs, as we know, love to wallow in mud. And they actually do that to cool down. They don't do it because they like to be messy.
No.
Actually, pigs are apparently amongst the cleanest animals.
The most intelligent. Yeah, they can actually do jigsaws. They can actually complete simple jigsaws.
Pictures of other pigs? Or
I don't know of what, but they can,
sausages.
I don't know how they do
Full
it.
English.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Well, if you've ever seen the film Babe, you'll know that they make good sheepdogs.
Yeah.
But pigs, to cool down, that's why they roll around in mud. It's because I guess they don't sweat, so they have to make themselves they have to get sort of water, and mud is the way that they do that. So when you look at a pig, it looks pretty filthy. It's always kind of got mud drip, and it
mixed with its own
mixed
waste,
with its own. Well, actually, apparently they go somewhere else to the toilet.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, so
Okay.
they don't sort of keep their food in their but they do, because of the way that they trot around, and they also with their sort of snouts, they hunt for food in the ground.
Right.
So they're turning over the mud, and then they're walking around in it, and then they're rolling in it, and so what you end up with is a very messy sort of animal
creature. Yeah.
If you compare that to a white, beautiful sheep, there's a very clear distinction there that God has sort of made in the animal world, and so it is helpful to look at. Because what God's trying to do is show a picture of our internal state before him. Internally, we are muddy and messy, and we have sinned and fallen short. We aren't the perfect, clean, white lamb or sheep anymore. So God says, hey, look at this animal here. Look how filthy it is. This is the state you are in spiritually. And that's a sort of a physical, outward picture, if you like, of our internal state.
And it became, the dietary laws in the Old Testament were partly there as well to draw a distinction between God's people and the nations.
Right.
So sometimes there are laws that we read in the Old Testament and we think, I'm not quite entirely sure why that would be the case, And sometimes that's because, or people think that's because, the nations around them would have been into eating that stuff, and and that was a way of saying, look, we're different, we're separate, we're called to be different from the nations around us. And one of the ways to demonstrate that would be something very physical and obvious, like a dietary law. So it's a way of kind of showing that they've been sanctified in that sense, set apart.
Right.
But the pig particularly becomes, some of the, the way that the wisdom literature and the prophets use it as well is really to talk about the pig as about the most disgusting thing you can think of. So there's this proverb, Proverbs 11:22, as a ring of gold in a swine's snout. The word swine is so much worse than pig, isn't it? Swine. As a ring of gold in a swine's snout, so is a beautiful woman who lacks discretion. And the logic of that proverb only works if the ring of gold is about the most precious thing you could find, and a pig's snout is about the worst thing that you could find. And a beautiful woman who lacks discretion is that same kind of contrast there. In the prophets, Isaiah, in Isaiah 66, talking about the kind of idolatrous worship practices, says, he who sacrifices a lamb is like one who breaks a dog's neck. He who offers a grain offering is like one who offers swine's blood. He who burns incense is like the one who blesses an idol. In other words, it seems that God's people were going through the motions of proper worship, but because they were also blessing, following, delighting in idols, their offerings had become a complete abomination to the Lord. And he compares a grain offering to offering swine's blood, which for an Old Testament Jew, Israelite, that you couldn't think of anything more offensive to bring the blood of a pig to the Lord, and yet that's how he looks upon. So it's become about the most offensive thing you can think of again. So as you said earlier on, it's not just because of what it is physically. It seems to be interwoven with kind of evil and uncleanness and defilement, really. And that goes on into the New Testament, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. There are a few examples we see with Jesus. There's a story that he tells, which we'll come on to, but another example of the uncleanliness and the sort of evilness of pigs. In Matthew chapter 8, Jesus comes across a man who is possessed by a legion of demons, and the demons sort of recognize who Jesus is, and they say to him, have you come here to torment us before our time? And they say, if you're going to cast us out, send us into the herd of swine. And there's like 2,000 pigs that are there, and Jesus says in Matthew chapter 8 verse 31, he says to them, go. And these demons leave this man and they go into this herd of pigs. And it says that the whole herd rush down the steep bank and perished in the waters. So it was like the appropriate place for an evil spirit was in the pig. That was the place it should go. And again, I guess, just another picture for us that the pig is this place of evil and this unclean thing that is suitable for demons to be in.
Yeah, that's right. And then one of the other great examples of that is Luke 15, isn't it? Where you've got this wonderful story of the runaway son who, wishing his father was dead, really, takes his share of the inheritance and goes and squanders it all in wild living. And he ends up with no friends, no money, and working amongst the pigs, and in such a state of desperation that he's longing even to eat the food, the pig food. If you think about a Jewish audience, again, first century Jewish audience listening to that, for a father to think of his son, ending up like that, is about as bleak as it gets, really. And again, it has both that physical and spiritual component. I think as we were chatting about this before, you put it really well, and you said that it's I can't remember how you put it now, but it's like the physical picture is showing us his spiritual reality, isn't it? That's not only is it bad physically, but it's showing us he's reached the very bottom of the barrel spiritually.
And we read that he came to his senses when he was in that situation. So here is this young man who is living a filthy, sort of spiritually evil life, in a sense, because he's very selfish. He's wished his father was dead. He's squandering his wealth on sort of wild living. He spiritually, he's amongst the pigsty. He is in the pigsty spiritually, but it takes for him to see himself physically in that situation, for him to come to his senses. And it's interesting. He doesn't come to his senses and go, "I'm in a pigsty. I want to be somewhere cleaner." He comes to his senses and says, "I have sinned against my father." And so really the physical surroundings of being in that pigsty, eating the pig food, gives him eyes to see his spiritual condition, which is that he is spiritually in the pigsty and spiritually malnourished. And when he was with his father, he was physically well looked after, but most importantly, he was spiritually in a healthy place, in the family, well fed, taken care of. And so that's a helpful picture for us to see. So it's a useful thing, isn't it? Thinking about the pig, it always makes me laugh when you get to Jesus's teaching about what makes a man unclean.
Yes.
And he's talking to the teacher of the law, and he says, "It isn't what goes into a man that makes them unclean, but what comes out of a man." And then within brackets, the author has written, "By saying this, Jesus declared all foods fit to eat." And it's like Jesus is teaching a spiritual lesson, and yet we still put that little bracket in to say, "Oh, by the way, it's okay, we can eat."
And that shows us what a big deal it must have been for them, and how radical Jesus' teaching on this stuff was. And I guess we'll come to that in a minute. I suppose one of the things by way of application of all this is what Jesus says when he talks about the message of the kingdom, the message of Christ being like a pearl. It's a pearl of great price. It's a great treasure to hear about the identity and the work of Christ the King. And Jesus cautions his disciples and says, there's a time in the face of opposition and resistance and constant rejection when actually you should no longer throw this pearl before swine. You shouldn't just keep casting the message of the kingdom out when it's being trampled on and rejected, and there is a time to move on. So that the swine becomes like synonymous with a gospel rejector, really, in that sense. Now, I think we'd be wise to think about how we use that evangelistically.
you swines.
But no, that's supposed to sort of, grab us by the collar, isn't it? And say, actually, to reject the message of the kingdom is to be unclean, is to be defiled, is to reject the most precious thing. And, if we carry on doing that, there might be a time where God withdraws the pearl and takes it and leaves us to the mud of our sin, leaves us to wallow in our unbelief, like the pig. And so there's a bit of a caution in the pig, isn't there? Saying, don't be like that when it comes to the gospel.
That's right.
Otherwise, otherwise it may move on in that sense. But just to come back to what you were saying, which is about the sort of Jesus declares all foods clean. So the New Testament, would sort of teach us a bit more about now how we relate to the pig, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So go on. So just flesh that out a bit more for us.
Spiritually, if this is the line that you're trying to go down, we were in the muck, we were in the mud of our sin. Christ has saved us from that. He's paid the price. He's paid the penalty for our sin, which was death. He's expiated. He's taken away the mud that was on us, so we're clean again. And what an amazing thing that is, actually. That's why Christ came. He hasn't come in the world to condemn pigs or people who are in the pigsty, but he's come to bring us out of that and save us from it. So he's taken us out of the pigsty, and that we're made for more than the pigsty. So if we look around and we see ourselves entrenched in things that addictions or sort of habits that are just degrading to us or whatever it is, we are made for more than that. We're made for the Father's household, not for the pigsty. And the Christ has come to take us out of that, which is an amazing thing. One of the troubles is after we have been cleansed and sanctified and removed from the pigsty, one of our tendencies is to go back to the pigsty. In 2 Peter chapter 2, it says, a dog returns to its own vomit, and a sow after washing returns to wallow in the mire. So a temptation we have, though we have been cleaned, though we have been removed from the pigsty, taken back into the Father's household, one of the temptations is for us to go back to the pigsty, which when you put it in those terms is crazy. When you think about the story of the prodigal son, he comes to his senses in the pigsty. He has this amazing reconciliation with the Father. He's back in the Father's house. The ring's put back on his finger. He's cleaned. He's got the family robe on his shoulders. It would be madness for him to go, do you know what? I kind of miss the pigsty a bit. I might go back. And yet, that is what we do all the time. We're so attracted
going back to the muck.
Going back to the muck.
Yeah. So it's interesting how that's picked up, isn't it? And I guess when it comes to our approach to pigs, is that, as you said, so in Mark 7, but also in Acts 10, where there's this vision, of a sheet coming down, and all the animals are on the sheet, the different creeping things, and the Lord says to Peter, to sort of take and eat, and he's thinking, there's no way, that's full of unclean stuff. And what's being taught there is that actually now you're not to call what God has made clean unclean anymore. So there was a massive shift there, and I think so when we read, it's not just like all of that stuff in the Old Testament is gone, the New Testament's here now. There's no continuity at all. Holiness is still important for God's people. They are still to live different, set apart lives. And holiness is still important when it comes to our eating and drinking. So there is an unholy way to eat and drink, and there is a holy way to eat and drink with thanksgiving and that sort of thing. But the way in which that holiness shows itself is not now in particular animals, shellfish that we can't eat, right. But rather we can eat all things with thanksgiving. And because that is no longer the means by which we display our holiness or make ourselves clean. That's through faith in Christ. We're sanctified in Christ, and then can enjoy all of God's good creation in that sense. So So we're not bound by these dietary laws anymore, and that's a good thing, because the pig is one of the most flavoursome of all the creatures, and we can with thanksgiving and praise eat it. There are times when just coming to my mind now. I mean, I remember I used to live with a chap while I was at uni. Who shared a house with 3 Muslims,
right?
And they took the dietary laws very, very seriously, and they still don't eat pigs for some of these reasons. And in the fridge, he had his own little section where he kept bacon and sausages, and it was labelled. His name was Rob's Unrighteous Food Stash. And it was sort of set apart there, for him to eat. And there might be times in that situation where you say, well, look, I'm not gonna make a big deal of it. I'm not gonna, try to serve pig all the time. But actually, for the sake of the gospel, I'll either have my own stash, or I'll just forego it completely in this house, and I won't eat it anymore, because I don't want it to be a stumbling block to eating together.
Sure.
I don't want to sit on the corner and have a bacon sandwich if it means I can't eat with these people. Right. So we might lay it down temporarily, but it no longer becomes the means by which we're clean or unclean, or that sort of thing.
Well, equally, there's a great gospel opportunity for that brother to talk about grace and to talk about the fact that actually it's not what goes in me that makes me unclean, but it's Christ that makes me clean, sort of regardless of what I eat. And by the way, if you don't eat meat, you're still unclean. But anyway, it's funny that his surname is
the heart, isn't it?
Wasn't he called Old Pork or something?
Well, his surname was New Ham. And so his nickname was Old Pork.
Old Porky had a pork stash.
If you're listening, mate, thanks for that witness and that illustration. Okay, so there we go. That's the pig. I can't think there's too much more to say about the pig, really. I hope that was a helpful overview of the pig and how it's used in the Bible, and so on. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do. We're going to be looking at another animal next week. Do stay tuned for the kids version of the pig, and we hope you will enjoy that. We'll begin that with some fun facts and a little quiz, as we did last time with the ants. So if you've got kids, do tune in to that one. And cornerstonechurchkingston.org, as I said at the beginning, is the place to go for lots of other resources, and our YouTube channels and social media channels for things as well. But thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.